The way you frame the problem is probably the biggest element of success or failure. So the first thing we tried and we succeeded was to build a complete and ready annotation tool that doesn't require anyone to help the computer to kind of process a game of football. And by doing this, we managed to annotate the full game within under 2 minutes. Work as we know it for the last 150 years is going to kind of look completely different. We're probably going to reach a point where we're going to reach abundance. When you work in AI, you just realize that most of the time, all models are working on the same data. I think the next really big company in AI would be completely decentralized and distributed. And hopefully people would realize that is probably the way forward.
This week on Gaea Talks, Max Sebti. How you doing?
All good, you?
Very good. So for the audience, let's get a little background, who you are, what you're doing, and why what you're up to is so exciting.
So Max Sebti, co-founder and CEO of Score. My background is mainly in, funny enough, we had a bit of this conversation before. I started as a creative in advertising, and then realized, kind of the importance of data in general. So I decided to try to work for data companies and ended up working for a data notation company that was a spin-off from a product that we probably all used at least once, which is called Age Capture. When you click on a horse picture to kind of train a computer based on images. And I was fascinated by how you could train computers using, as we call human in the loop. And then I kept thinking about how to leverage this kind of computer-human relationship to build products, and I ended up co-founding what we like to call a protocol, but in reality it's more kind of a community of machine learning engineers and enthusiasts. And the whole idea was to create a competition where we would try to get the best out of this community to help clients get better machine learning models or AI models, even if AI can obviously mean a lot of different things. And with those two projects, I just realized how powerful it was to leverage the collective intelligence. So I just realized that if anything, I would always build products that would use a large community of people to contribute and bring their best, if that makes sense. And whilst I was working for my previous company called Quant, someone came to me and asked me about how I could apply the same principle in sports, funny enough. And I was also like really intrigued, right? Because sports was something completely different from what I was doing. I was mostly focused on financial type of things with hedge funds, and we had a client and that was like the sovereign wealth fund of of Abu Dhabi and stuff like that. So anyway, sports kind of was sounded like exotic to me. So tried to build the same approach around sports, and then realized that if you want it to be relevant in sports, you had to control everything from the very first signal, which is visual, right? It's visual content, to then obviously the usual machine learning pipeline. So I decided to build Score, which is a vision AI research company. And our focus, and I'm pretty sure we'll have a lot of things to talk about around that thing, but our focus is to help people in the real world to really kind of codify what they do, to help them act on things that are happening in the real world using AI. And this is pretty much the way we are helping lots of different customers at the moment. But again, started in sports, so yeah, I'm pretty sure you have some questions about what we did in this field.
Well, as we discussed, you're an Arsenal fan. I'm a Newcastle fan.
Yeah.
So football is close to our hearts. So we probably have a good idea of statistics and performance, and probably a million questions about why certain players have done well. And we were talking about why Newcastle for years did terribly in London. Now they do really well in London. But we will all have observations. And how do you really look at addressing what really is an extremely complex human problem? I mean, that's what sport and that's what football particularly is. But you explain to me how complex football is in comparison to other sports.
Yeah. I would say in comparison to other sports or any other vertical, I would say, because you have 20, let's say 22 players moving around, fighting. It's kind of a dance, right? And it's non-stop. And so I know that you know a lot about computer vision, but I don't want to kind of sound too techie here.
Well, just to interject there, because it's just occurring to me. We all know the stories of AI being trained on chess. Yeah. So I move, then you move. Yeah. This is really, imagine all the chess players on both sides, chess pieces on both sides, are all simultaneously moving. I mean, that's a whole different quantum.
Yeah, it's completely different. So as you said, it started with chess. Then, as we know, Google DeepMind had their go moment, right? They just realized that AI could be creative in something that was, considered as the most complex game in the world. But yeah, football is it's on another level because everything is moving. It's non-stop. Most of the time, you want to build something that is resilient enough to also work with broadcast content. So you also have people moving on and out, from the screen. So you have to run lots of complex algorithms to kind of extrapolate where they are. Anyway, so it's a mess. Pardon my French on that from that perspective, but it was the first thing we focused on. Funny enough, so we kind of started with the most complex thing we could ever start with, and actually we learned a lot of things. And in AI and machine learning AI, or with any, I would say, scientific approach, you always try to set different set up a framework first, so you can obviously measure things, but also try to understand what's your playing field, right? And what kind of data you would need, and so on and so forth. The beauty of football is that data is available. It's pretty easy. Even if you want to be a bit, funny, you can scrape data on YouTube and stuff like that. So you can start training content. But actually, in football, there's an academic competition called SoccerNet, which acts like as a benchmark for the industry. And it's easy to get their data set and start running models. But we wanted to have a different approach, more of a DeepMind approach as well to football. So we started with different things. The first thing we tried to do was to get to the same level as any other incumbents, like real big companies in data annotation, sports data annotation, but without any human in the loop. So the first thing we tried, and we succeeded, was to build a complete and ready annotation tool that doesn't require anyone to help the computer to kind of process a game of football. And by doing this, we managed to annotate the full game within under 2 minutes. And this model is more accurate than any human being. So that was the first thing we tried to do, and we're very happy about the result. We did it in a very, I would say, innovative way, because as I told you, I'm completely obsessed by the power of the crowd and collective intelligence. So we built our first approach, let's say, more than a model, because it's more of a mixture of approaches, by running a competition. So we built an incentive mechanism for computer vision engineers to come and compete.
And this is an interesting approach where, again, something we've discussed before, but a really important point in how people should think about AI in the context of the real world. There was a business problem first and foremost. In order to resource and really execute how to solve a problem, and you're right, Go was considered the most complex game in the world, but I would maybe add board game because you look at football, the derivatives, the movement, the challenge is monumental. It's not purely mathematic. So, I mean, that, carry on as you were, but that was just an important point I think we need to infuse in here.
Critical point, and it also exactly why we started by fixing our ability to annotate data on scale. That was the critical part of the process. So we needed to find a way to replace companies with 100 staff, companies that have raised tens of millions of dollars and that were running those models for years. We had to find a way to compete against them in a very short amount of time, because our challenge was less on that front than it was on the Go deep mind approach to this sport. And what we are still trying to do, by the way, because it's super complex, as you said, and thanks to one of our co-founders, Dr. Peter Cotton, who's he's kind of a math guy, genius, Quant, New York type of guy. We have our own approach to that, and obviously we're treating video as something we can compress on a time series. So we started with kind of fixing the way we were collecting data so we could get any stream, any quality, and build strong data sets to then apply very kind of quant type of financial approach to this data set.
And as you were saying, the quant, that distributed model across the financial industry was a great element of a business model to understand how to scale that up, as well as technologically.
Yeah, definitely. Because it obviously, the reason I think it was the right approach is because, in finance, you need to find an edge. So your incentives are around being able to process large amount of data to find an edge rather quickly, because you know that you would be out of business if you don't get to find an edge.
Finding alpha, isn't it?
Yeah, finding alpha, that's how they call it. So we had the exact same approach with football, because the biggest task we were ever asked about, and it's from someone who's massively respected in this industry, who's the CEO of Juventus, Damien Comolli's the godfather of data in football. He said, I can have access to pretty much any tools. You guys are not going to come with something that would be impressive, because from an annotation perspective, I've seen it all, right? But he said, if you guys, and with Peter, if you're able to build first what he called a language, but then also a translation tool that would help any club or any entity in sport in general, by the way, to assess the quality of a player or a team in different leagues at different levels in different regions, you would solve the biggest problem in sports and in football, and that would help entities and clubs and leagues and federations to kind of map out all the different talents across the globe, and then really build a very strong recruitment pipeline, because you would be able to assess performance in a non-biased way, which is pretty much the biggest challenge.
Well, I remember Jon Dahl Tomasson, I think it is, because he joined Newcastle from, I think it was an Italian club from memory. Didn't really do very well, didn't work, didn't fit. Or maybe he went to an Italian club afterwards and did extremely well. And you see that with a few players. I mean, perhaps Liverpool could have thought that about Alexander Isak.
Probably, yeah. But there's a great example with Newcastle as well. Guimares is a great example because when he was playing in France, he was playing as a six.
Right.
Yeah, and it is actually better at as an eight, right? So it's exactly this that you need to codify. Basically, you need to have to find a way to quantify it and to make it repeatable and scalable. And this is like the biggest challenge in sports at the moment. It's not even about betting or whatever. Obviously, that could be useful for those companies, but there's a huge challenge here, which is going to produce kind of a AlphaGo moment in football as well.
And especially with football as well. If we think about how does a football club run these days, where's the value? We can look at clubs like Chelsea who buy a lot of players in and they move a lot of players, but they have a lot of turnover, but they make money. Even if they're buying players that they can bring to the fore and sell for a big profit, that's really the concept of sustainable football.
That's the revenue line. That's the reason why that's the biggest challenge, because if you fix this, then you know that you have a way to run forecasts on your ability to grow your club from a revenue perspective, and you can compete. And there's a lot of different, obviously, complexities around running a club. And I'm not a club owner, so but from my, got from different conversations we had at different levels, by the way, because we started with conversation with Damien Kamali, but also we partner with Reading FC in England. Owners want to know, obviously, how much money they would make, so they could obviously scale their investment and have kind of a long-term vision or plan around the club. And if you fix that problem, then for them it becomes another kind of type of financial play.
Because you can ascertain everything else. Stadium size. I mean, Newcastle are looking at either a new stadium or stadium expansion. We know that Wembley, we know Stamford Bridge, we know all the capacity, the ticket price. You can fluctuate some elements, but you can't make a stadium grow without touching it. So you actually have a revenue stream. We know that the Champions League, if you're in that, if you do X amount of progress, you'll make whatever. If you go through further, you'll make it. You've got your various income streams. You can get your merchandise, your sponsorship deals. The one variable that is probably the most important, but is the most unpredictable, so you have the risk of injury, and that's an insurable risk. So if we took football club out and we replaced it with XXX business, any type of business, then understanding your risk, understanding future projections, understanding your marketplace, and understanding your asset management is completely normal. So it's really the application of multimodal AI to understand, not really too differently, the nuances of the complexity, but still very similar to a hedge fund.
Exactly. And this is pretty much how we approach things. So that's the reason why we started with a real world problem, a business problem, as you said. Then we applied hedge funds principles to try to solve the first problem we've been tasked to solve. And then we realized that with this approach, we could actually apply our tech to many different verticals and not just sports.
And what has your experience been dealing with non-AI people that work in sport, work in finance, people that don't do AI for a living, about how they understand artificial intelligence and how the difference between the narrative and the reality?
I think most importantly, I would say that they're all goal-driven. So they come to you because they hear about, they heard about you being able to do X, Y, or Z with any other companies. And the first question is always the same. The first question is not about benchmarks or, how accurate you are against this or that type of, paper on archive. The first thing is always like, oh, I'm actually facing this problem. Can you help do that? Or would AI be of any help here? And I think the reality is this part of the conversation is the most critical one, because the way you collect intent, the way you frame the problem is probably the biggest, element of success or failure. So I would say in AI, like in many other industries, the problem I see at the moment is that there's not really I would say a bridge or something that helps like business people or, large enterprise customers, or even sometimes small stores around the corner, to really frame the problem in a way where they could see that, they can make something meaningful for them. So they all end up asking questions to ChatGPT, and then they realize that it's not really what they were looking for. And then you kind of have to work backwards to tell them, okay, let's try to understand what's the problem. Let's try to build your own benchmark, and what would success look like for you. Yeah.
So is that then not necessarily an AI problem, but a typical business problem? So in many ways, if people think about the problems they actually have, and there's probably a layer of education to say, if we broke down AI, well, what is its capabilities and its various forms? And if you realize what the capabilities are, then you're going to put that into the context of the problems that you have as a business.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But funny enough, I think that AI can do this. So this is our angle. We think AI can help people frame the problem and then make sure and validate that this is what they were trying to solve, and then help people to just press a button and see if it's doing what they think it would do. But yeah, framing the problem is always, the most complex thing to do in any businesses, I would say.
How would you look at, for the average person watching who's either running a business, management within a business, or working for a business, how would you explain what AI is? How would you break that down?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to try not to use, technical terms too much, but for me, the way I see AI is it's actually a way to codify the world so you can just do more as an individual. This is how I would frame AI. It's a new type of technology that is supposed to be helpful and bring more value, and get you more for your for your time, basically, to help you get to do more, to achieve more on a daily basis, or even just have more time for yourself. So, and obviously when I talk about AI this way, it's to kind of talk to individuals, but it could be applied to organizations as well. How can you be more efficient? How can you run processes in a leaner way? It's always the same thing. It's all about productivity, but I would say on a broader level, the thing we are going to go through is the combination with those algorithms, I would say AI models, or whatever, however we call them, and cheap energy is probably going to make a bigger difference in everyone's day-to-day life, I would say, than pretty much all the other tech revolutions we've been through. So I think there's also this part of AI where it's not just an assistant. At some point, it's going to be so productive that if you combine this with cheap energy, for instance, then it's going to completely create a new world where work as we know it for the last 150 years is going to kind of look completely different. We're probably going to reach a point where we're going to reach abundance, and people are going to also, find other stuff to do on a daily basis. So yeah, so I will stop there because it's a bit too much of a sci-fi movie here, but
it does open up a relationship with previous conversations. I mentioned it in the last one because Melissa was she had written a book which covered part of this. And Ben Legg, former Google CEO of UK and Europe, his focus is a portfolio career. So the idea that everything around us, and it's very true, if we look around us, things are evolving, they're changing rapidly. Even in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen the younger generations value their own time and the things that they do differently, their access to data, therefore their life experience. And we've also had a pandemic in the thick of that with lockdowns. There has been a fundamental cultural jolt, so to speak. The adoption in the mainstream and full proliferation of social media technology has probably changed the relationship with how individuals learn, receive information, communicate. So we are constantly in this huge shift, and it's not AI is the thing that's changed it. It's just another it's another incremental layer upon some very definable incremental layers that have been stacked on top of each other in a relatively short sequential period of time over the last 20 years. So now it's probably quite unrecognizable for what it was from what it was then. So moving forward, the idea of the portfolio career, the idea that we can have multiple revenue streams as individuals, that businesses look to resource in a different way to get, and even going back to football, the best forward you can. If your strategy is playing down the wings and getting balls whipped in 10 times each half, you want someone who's good in the air. So you're going to then begin to describe what you need, and just having someone that is a generalist probably won't work in every position. Of course, if you play the wrong strategy with very particular players, it'll probably end up going a bit wrong. Sometimes it's not your own fault, it's just how it is. But both the individual and the organization can be relatively liquid and say, let's get the very best. I need that for 8 hours a week. I need this sort of person. So the demand will be there. I think the assumption when people say AI is going to take your jobs, that holds the construct that jobs were or are like they always were, which is not the case if you observe. So then the energy, going back to the point you mentioned, I think that's a really important point. And what I've seen with a lot of the people that we work with is the concept of edge, control, and real time. Real time is important, which tends to give you the view of control, which is a byproduct of edge. But that goes against the narrative of the very, very large, purely cloud-based companies. What's your view on that and the implication on the energy demand?
And that's a very interesting question. My view is that as probably going to mention NVIDIA here, but as we get access to fairly cheap, powerful GPUs, I think people are going to start running their own models at home. This is pretty much what I think, and this is where energy, AI, private models, the whole combination is going to create something new. Because, as you mention it, you would be able to live pretty much anywhere in the world as long as you have access to energy. You'd be able to contribute to the economy in a very unique way within this kind of liquid market. And as you said as well, I think that's going to create a 24/7 liquid, I'm tempted to say talent, but more like, ability driven type of model. So as you said, and the football example was great, companies, entities, organizations, communities are going to be able to tap into a very specific skill set just when they need, because that's going to be so cheap for everyone to be out on the market showing what they can do and how they can move and achieve things in in a unique way, if that makes sense. And we start to see this even within our team. Like people are like, with the new coding agents and stuff like that, I should probably just run my own company, right? And everyone starts to think like that, which is quite new.
Yeah, and it goes back to your question as the business, the founder, the owner. You're looking to solve a problem, and you're looking to solve a problem that other business owners and managers have as well. And whether it's up to enterprise level, where it's just an aggregation of lots of problems within a probably more wider structure, or a very narrow, specific, smaller team. The problem for smaller teams, they didn't have the resources to get the access the larger companies did, but the larger companies have probably the access and the budgets, but didn't have the fluidity, the scalability, and there's extra complications of management layers which kind of become like treacle, slow everything down. But that kind of liquid approach on both sides, really, there is huge efficiencies, productivity gains, but probably not quite for the reason that has been pre-sold in the first instance. Because when you do have a bit of education, you can understand the concepts of what you've just said there, then actually it becomes really exciting as an individual. And talent is obviously one element. And we're talking about AI talent, football talent. There's talent associated to a skill, and we all have different skills, but also expertise, years of knowledge to instinctively understand why something could work. I mean, I work with a wide range of people with really fantastic backgrounds, very, very different. And the interesting thing within an organization, and it goes back to something Steve Jobs had said, a company is simply a group of individuals with a common goal, something along paraphrasing. And if you understand what the goal and the objective is, you can say, oh, we resourced correctly, but the fact that other people around you think differently is enriching.
Completely agree. And that's going back to my obsession with collective intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So I just realized, because we went through this across different projects, and yeah, I've got a funny example. So when I was still a Crunch, sort of business I co-founded, one of our customers was, and I think still was Adia. So that's the one part of the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi. They have the biggest quant team in the world, top level. I mean, Champions League level, to kind of do a football analogy. And they were, so on several benchmarks, so that was not in production, but on different benchmarks, the community that we were running just was just better. 24% better across all the different benchmarks, just because talent is not located where you think it is.
Yeah, I mean, it looks at the kind of socioeconomic siloing of people. And I mean, if you think Oxford, Cambridge graduates, there's obviously some very, very smart people there. If you look at a lot of really innovative, really incredible inventors and thinkers, they could equally have come from a council estate. And how do you reach for them? I mean, it also looks then, I'm kind of bouncing around with thoughts, but the idea that some communities don't have the access or the education, so they're probably less likely to have access to reach the type of jobs, but the people offering the jobs are looking for the talent and they're just not finding them because of the socioeconomic bridges. But even internationally, I mean, it's something which has come up a lot in conversation with friends recently. Is there an AI model for Eritreans or Mongolians that you could pick anywhere in the world? Exactly. And there is a huge difference culturally, in look, in so many different styles across the world, but where have the predominant generalized models been made? We know what they look like, and that underserves probably 2/3 of the humans on Earth. Now, if they could have the capability to say this is what works on a more localized basis, or works for me, but on an international basis, where you could have control, I mean, it's a huge potential, because even in purely business economic terms, the majority of the world is relatively untapped and underserved in any meaningful way when it comes to AI.
Yeah, definitely. We're barely scratching the surface here. And as you said, in different fields, I would say expertise is definitely something we have to have access to now, so we can make systems that are actually really helpful. But also, as you said, there's a lot of bias. I mean, we all know the big names, the big labs. They're all pretty much located in the same region of the world, pretty much using all the same. That's also crazy, because they're pretty much all. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it just makes me training data.
Yeah,
it's the same company, isn't it?
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Explain it, elaborate a bit more to the audience, because I think it is a really important point.
Yeah. Okay. So when you want to build an AI model, you have to start from a data set. You need data to start training a model, and the approach, the current top names, OpenAI and Anthropic, yada yada yada, the approach they went with was obviously convenient, because it was the short route to being able to launch a product. And they did different things. So they start scraping the internet, the whole internet. And obviously the information on the internet is the same for everyone, right? So then they ended up working with the same data sets. And then they realized that they needed to have access to more specific data in different fields. And they ended up working with the same data labeling companies as well, that were producing pretty much the same data sets. So if anything, and obviously they would argue that it's not the case, and yada yada yada, and maybe it's not the case, but when you work in AI, you just realize that most of the time all models are working on the same data. And I'm not sure, you probably use all of them. You can find a lot of similarities, which makes sense, because they're sharing the same information.
Yeah, if it comes from the same place. I've heard stories with some of these. We've had a few guests on who've mentioned this, and there was a particular story about one of these very large data labeling companies, of how they extracted, they got data, and the training of that data was, I think, in Kenya, and they were paying them very, very, very little, something which would be illegal here and probably a lot of other countries. But it was for particular companies which operated, the very high profile ones. There really is an ethical and even an energy standpoint that people hear a lot. But if you change the word labeling with making t-shirts, we would have a very different visceral reaction. Go, well, that is out of order, that's wrong. To the point we now have processes in place, even at a Fortune 500 company level. There are ethical requirements, legal requirements of how to behave and what we allow within our supply chains. All of that's gone out the window.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because it's an arms race. That's the answer you'll hear from everyone in this industry. And whether you like it or not, I'd rather have our approach where you build an AI system that actually does the annotation. Because I'd rather have no human in the loop than having to work in this, or make people work in bad conditions, if that makes sense. So it's definitely an approach. It's another angle. I'm no one to judge and blame other people, for adopting other approaches. But from the get-go, we decided that we had to find a way to have like completely automated annotations.
Mm. I think the net result as well, when you do understand what's happening, you understand that in many ways, a lot of what we are told is kind of a bit lazy. And when things are not as efficient and they don't work quite as well, and it goes to the trust point, and I think I said to you before, using some of these big models, language models, albeit, they are getting better and better, but I'll still see things that I know factually are wrong. And how things are presented makes me think, even if it's plausible, I know potentially any single bit of this could be wrong. So I spend so much time checking. I mean, as an analogy, where's the value in knowing the truth, knowing the control? If you are making critical decisions or any decisions, if you make foundational decisions, one after the other, and then when you reverse back and say things aren't working, why? Because 300 decisions ago we based it on something which is completely and utterly false. And it's that transparency of knowing, were you in control? Is that associated to the business problem? It kind of connects all the dots together.
Yeah, that's also the main reason why I think AI, at least on its, at the, let's say, validation mechanism level, should be open source. So I'm not against people obviously building for-profit companies. And, we all need to make money and bring value to different type of people. But I think it's going to be so critical and entangle, let's say, in our day-to-day lives, that we have to find a way to let people know exactly what we went through to kind of start building products and stuff like that. Obviously, you need to be a bit of a developer to be able to check, but yeah, I think it has to be a bit more transparent. The way you build models and the way you bring this new technology to people.
So how do you think it's going to be in 2, 5 and 10 years time? I mean, beyond a certain point, it's purely...
I mean, making predictions on those things, it's quite hard because it's moving so quickly.
What would you like to see then? Rather than predictions, a vision?
Yeah, so obviously that's pretty much our thesis. What I'd love to see is a world where instead of being it's almost like I'd love to have people involved in this tech, find a way to get anyone involved in how we build it. That would be something quite exciting, because I think it's obviously a bit Che Guevara for me to say that, but it is, I think, critical to get people involved. So make AI more distributed, allow people to have a say. And get obviously alignment, so we can also. I'm not the type of person to try to control technology, but at least know what's happening behind the curtains is definitely important. So hopefully in 2 years we'll have more transparency. I hope that open source models are going to be more prominent. That would be great. 5 years, I'm pretty sure that we'll all be retired by, just because AI would do pretty much everything we have to do on a daily basis, or maybe we'll be able to spend a lot of time building stuff that are just interesting or creative.
But does that lead to a problem? It's a little paradox, which is beginning to creep up more and more, which is if humans on Earth are ultimately all in some form customers, right? Whether it's buying clothes, buying food, you're paying for certain things. If we end up in a position where all of our work is done for us and all businesses get to the point where there's no humans, where's that mix? Because if there's no customers to buy and there's no customers to sell to.
I think it goes both ways. And again, if we kind of come back to what we were saying, I think we all have something to bring on the table, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to be completely liquid. So my agent, let's say, because that's pretty much how people kind of name this tech at the moment, my agent will build something based on my skills, and my agent will start selling something based on my skills. But at the same time, I would also pay for someone else's skills. So I can see a world where things are going to be flat.
So we're really talking more the actual physical humans' time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to say when I say we'll all be retired. It's more like, as human beings, we'll have to find another way of enjoying our time on this planet, I think, which is worrying at some point, but maybe we'll, I don't know, build something new and different, positive, hopefully.
Well, if we look at how humans behave, there are people that probably the majority run away from adversity. There are those that actively seek it, and there's probably people in between. And adversity could be, I mean, it's very different when adversity is forced upon you. When I've spent time in war zones, and I've seen a lot of kids who never asked for any opinions on politics or religion or anything. They're kids, they don't even know that yet. No one invited the adversity that a lot of the people that I've seen in these war zones have wanted. But equally, being mates with some of the SAS lads, they actively seek it because it is what rounds them and forms them. And I look for it a bit myself. You it's like building muscles. You're not going to build your muscles without putting your body through something in order to grow, to expand. Mentally, we're probably the least exercised muscle for a while, and AI could have been making people lazier for a while. But I think when you can see the impact, it's a bit like fast food. It was convenient, so it worked. Things that are convenient tend to be adopted very quickly. But after a period of time, people begin to see the thing that is making them feel a bit rubbish. Then you have the whole culture shift.
Yeah. I mean, organic food and
now everyone's getting healthy stuff and they have healthy shakes. The younger generations don't drink anywhere near as much alcohol.
That's true.
There is on pure metrics and evidence a big change. And if we see that play out, then if we had more time, would probably see the equal sort of proportion of people with behavioral traits to lean harder and deeper into either one extreme or the other.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that would also open up other opportunities, probably like universal income, things like that. You mentioned war zones and stuff. That would be great if open source models that you can share with anyone would create opportunities for people to either make a living using them or even just benefit from other people, other entities, other communities being able to generate so much value that they can actually share it.
That also lends itself towards Tim Berners-Lee original view on the internet, a place that an individual had sovereign control in the World Wide Web, where everyone had the opportunity to put something forward, to create, to share. We've almost gone from that and thought that was fantastic, and then it's turned into, I mean, if we really look at the main three players, particularly there's one in mind, and I think people can figure out who they are. This one particular, we know their business model is to take everything of the internet and everything underneath and become the monetized layer between your access to that information. By effectively everything goes through that. So it's the opposite extreme to what Tim Berners-Lee had in mind. But now people are beginning to see that. I think the net result of that, probably individuals and organizations search for domination of control over information, naturally leads to the opposite outcome they're seeking to achieve, and results in more like the Tim Berners-Lee view, where the individual is empowered, but that means distributing human responsibility and ability as from a human level on a global basis, rather than the segmentation which we're sort of seeing with, you get the Chinese models, you get the American models, and that segregation which goes back to the data point. That's quite fascinating.
It is. I think people should probably try to understand why. I think the next really big company in AI would be completely decentralized and distributed. And hopefully people would realize that is probably the way forward. Hopefully, because they would be part of it. They would be part of it, and they would not miss the train and have to, the way we did with the internet, wait for 40 years ish, 30 years to realize that we were actually the product.
Yeah. But as people are realizing, and I think they have realized that, it comes to a point where I think we're so far away from the understanding of the world, at least from British, French, American perhaps, post-World War II. We came very close to understanding what freedom was meant when it was removed and taken away. And people valued that. And the modern world as we know it was built off understanding what freedom could bring. Perhaps that's been somewhat forgotten, and people will eventually come back to the point when the wrong AI, or the generalized control AI, which is, I think, the mainstream narrative. When people see that for what it is and they realize, hold on, if I want to do something, even with, I've heard a lot of people mention a enterprise level adoption AI. I'm intentionally not mentioning names, but where it's been somewhat forced upon them. And they go, I don't want someone reading through my emails. I don't want this telling me if I own my own computer. Yeah. I don't want to have ads shown, and I don't want it saying no. I'll handle all of it, and all your data's leaking out. I mean, I think that it's gone a little too far, to the point where PCs are now shipping with Linux on an ever increasing level.
Yeah, I mean, same thing as you said with food. People are just now buying, their groceries out of organic, Whole Foods shops and stuff like that, because now they know what, they want to know what they put on, on the plate. So it's the same thing. I think it's very sound to try to kind of get to the point where you know what you're eating, and you know what you're providing to this kind of big world brain. That's definitely hopefully what people would keep doing.
Okay, so let's have one final thing to run through. What ideas, what thoughts, how would you like people, the audience, million odd people, what would you like to leave with them?
That's a deep question, but I would say that, and I'm probably going to use an example. We know about AI at the moment through just some, I would say, silly chats or stuff like that. We think that AI could be like a great assistant or a companion or something like that. I would just say that you don't run a warehouse just based on a conversation with, a chatbot. And if you understand the difference between having a conversation, thinking about something, having almost like a brainstorming session with yourself, to apply something in the real world with real consequences, then you probably need to spend a bit more time studying what AI is and can do, and you would probably get a head start and make your business more efficient, and maybe grab this kind of opportunity before your competitors or the people you evolving with or competing against.
And it's not just your business, is it? It's your business, it's your career, it's your life. Thinking right, and I completely agree with everything you just said there. Take that approach, implement that, and actually, irrespective of what you see around, there is huge opportunity. So, brilliant. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.